This is my true story. Every Sunday my wife went out to buy bread, and it took her 2 hours to come back home with a simple loaf that should have taken 15 minutes. She always had excuses, always had explanations, and I always believed her because I loved her and trusted her with my whole heart. But one day the baker stopped me outside his shop and told me something that destroyed my entire world. Something that made me realize my wife had been lying to me for 6 months straight. What he told me changed everything and ended my marriage forever. But you won't believe what happened next. Before that, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe to this channel so that my stories can reach more people. I married my wife 15 years ago in a small ceremony at the local church, with just our closest friends and family members watching us exchange vows that I truly believed would last forever. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, with kind eyes and a warm smile that made me feel like the luckiest man alive every single time she looked at me. And I fell deeper in love with her with each passing year, instead of growing apart like so many couples seem to do. We built our life together brick by brick, creating a home filled with trust and routine and simple joys that might seem boring to others, but felt like paradise to me, because I got to share them with her. Sunday mornings were always our favorite time of the week, a sacred ritual that we developed early in our marriage and maintained religiously for 15 years without fail. We would wake up slowly, no alarm clocks allowed, and spend the first hour of the day just lying in bed together, talking about nothing important and enjoying the peace of having nowhere to be and nothing urgent to do. Then she would lean over and kiss my forehead softly, the way she always did, and tell me she was going to walk down to the bakery to get us fresh bread for breakfast while I made the coffee and set the table. I loved those Sunday mornings more than I can possibly express. Loved the anticipation of waiting for her to return. Loved hearing the front door open and seeing her walk in with that paper bag from the bakery that always smelled so good you could taste it from across the room. I would have the coffee ready, 2 cups poured, and we would sit at our small kitchen table eating warm bread with butter and jam while talking about our plans for the day or reminiscing about memories from our years together. Those mornings felt like the foundation of our entire relationship, the proof that we had built something real and lasting and worth protecting. I trusted her completely, without reservation or doubt, because she had never given me any reason to question her loyalty or her love for me throughout our entire marriage. She was my best friend, my partner, the person I told everything to and shared every part of my life with, and the idea of her deceiving me about anything would have seemed absurd if someone had suggested it to me. Trust was the bedrock of our relationship, the thing that made everything else possible, and I gave her mine freely because I believed with my whole heart that she deserved it and would never betray it. Our life together was simple, but I thought it was perfect. A quiet existence that revolved around each other and the small pleasures we found in everyday moments. We didn't have children, which was a sadness we both carried but had learned to live with over the years, and maybe that made us even closer because we only had each other to rely on for companionship and support. I thought our bond was unbreakable, thought we were one of those rare couples who would grow old together, still holding hands, still in love, still grateful for each other after decades of marriage. I never imagined that the woman I loved so completely could be hiding anything from me. Never suspected that those Sunday morning bread runs might be anything other than what she said they were. She would kiss my forehead and promise to be back soon, and I would count the minutes with a smile on my face, eager for her return, not because I was suspicious, but because I simply missed her whenever she wasn't by my side. I was a fool in love, blind to the truth that was right in front of me, too devoted to see the cracks that were forming in the foundation I thought was so solid. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was, how desperately I wanted to believe in the fairy tale we had built together, that I ignored every warning sign and accepted every excuse without question. But at the time, I was just a man who loved his wife, a husband who cherished his marriage, and I had no idea that everything I believed about our life together was about to come crashing down around me. The bakery was only a 10-minute walk from our house, a small family-owned shop on the corner of the main street that had been serving our neighborhood for generations. And even if there was a line, the entire transaction should have taken 30 minutes at the absolute most. But every Sunday without fail, my wife would leave around 9 in the morning and not return until close to 11, turning a simple errand into a 2-hour disappearance that I never thought to question because I loved her too much to be suspicious of the woman I had shared my life with for 15 years. She always had an explanation ready when she walked through the door, always had a story prepared that seemed reasonable enough to satisfy my curiosity without ever really explaining where all that time had gone. Sometimes she said the line at the bakery was incredibly long because everyone in the neighborhood seemed to want fresh bread on Sunday mornings. And I would nod and accept this even though I had never seen lines at that bakery that would justify a 2-hour wait. Other times, she said she ran into an old friend on the street and they got talking and lost track of time, and I would smile and ask about the friend, even though she never mentioned names I recognized. I believed her every single time because doubting her felt like a betrayal of everything our marriage was supposed to be. Felt like accusing an innocent woman of something terrible just because bread took longer than it should have. I told myself that I was being paranoid, that suspicious husbands destroyed good marriages by letting their imaginations run wild, and that trusting my wife was the right thing to do even when her explanations didn't quite add up. I chose love over logic, chose faith over evidence, chose to believe in the woman I married rather than the uncomfortable questions that occasionally bubbled up in the back of my mind. But there were signs I should have noticed. Small details that didn't fit her stories, but that I dismissed or ignored because confronting them would have meant confronting the possibility that my wife was lying to me. Sometimes she would come home from these bread runs with a strange perfume clinging to her clothes, a scent that wasn't hers and that she couldn't have picked up just from standing in a bakery or chatting with a friend on the street. I noticed it more than once, that unfamiliar smell that seemed to be on her neck and her hair. But when I mentioned it casually, she said the bakery must have a new air freshener, or maybe she tried a sample at the pharmacy next door. There was also something different about her eyes when she returned from those Sunday trips, a distant look that suggested her mind was somewhere else entirely, even as she smiled at me and handed over the bag of bread. She seemed distracted sometimes, lost in thoughts she wouldn't share with me, and when I asked if everything was okay, she would snap back to attention and insist that everything was perfect while changing the subject to something else. I told myself she was just tired, just dealing with her own thoughts, just being a normal person with an inner life that didn't always include me. I ignored every red flag because I wanted to believe in our marriage more than I wanted to know the truth, and because the alternative explanation was too painful to even consider. The idea that my wife might be using these bread runs as cover for something else, something she was hiding from me, something that would explain the 2 hours and the strange perfume and the distant eyes, was simply not something I allowed myself to think about for more than a few seconds at a time. I pushed those thoughts away, buried them under layers of trust and love and willful blindness, and continued to wait every Sunday morning with my coffee ready and my heart full of anticipation for a woman who was apparently living a double life right under my nose. Looking back now, I feel like such an idiot for not seeing what was so obviously happening. But at the time, I genuinely believed that suspicion would poison our relationship more than whatever truth might be hiding behind those excuses, and I chose to remain ignorant rather than risk destroying something I thought was worth protecting. There were so many excuses over those 6 months, so many little lies that I swallowed without question, because challenging them would have meant admitting that something was seriously wrong with my marriage, and I wasn't ready to face that possibility. Every Sunday brought a new explanation for the 2-hour absence, a new story that I accepted with a smile and a nod, even when the details didn't quite match up with reality or with the excuses she had given the week before. I became an expert at believing things that didn't make sense because the alternative was too painful to consider. Sometimes she would come home with her lipstick slightly smudged, not completely wiped off but definitely different than when she had left the house 2 hours earlier, and when I noticed it, she would laugh it off and say she had eaten something at the bakery or licked her lips because of the cold air outside. I accepted these explanations even though they didn't really explain how lipstick gets smudged in that particular way. Even though some part of me knew exactly how lipstick gets smudged like that, and I told myself I was being ridiculous for even noticing such a small detail. She was my wife. She had been faithful to me for 15 years, and I was not going to become one of those paranoid husbands who accuses their spouse of infidelity over lipstick. Her hair was often different too when she returned from the bakery, slightly disheveled or styled differently than when she had walked out the door. and her explanations for this were always related to the weather, even when the weather didn't really support her claims. The wind messed it up, she would say, or she had to take her scarf off because it was warmer than expected, or she had run into a friend and they hugged and it got mussed up in the embrace. I nodded and smiled and poured her coffee and pretended that I didn't notice how often the wind seemed to affect only her hair while leaving everything else about her appearance perfectly intact. The perfume was the hardest thing to explain away, that unfamiliar scent that clung to her clothes and her skin with a stubbornness that suggested more than casual contact with its source. She tried different excuses each time I mentioned it, saying she must have walked past someone wearing strong perfume, or that the bakery had started using new cleaning products, or that she tried a sample at some shop she passed on her walk. None of these explanations made sense for a scent that seemed to come from her neck and her collar and her hair, but I accepted them anyway, because the real explanation was something I couldn't bring myself to consider. I swallowed every excuse she gave me, washed them down with the coffee I made while waiting for her to return, and convinced myself that I was being a good husband by trusting my wife instead of interrogating her about every little inconsistency. I told myself that happy marriages were built on trust, that jealousy was poison, that the worst thing I could do was become suspicious of a woman who had given me no concrete reason to doubt her beyond some lipstick and perfume and hair that might have perfectly innocent explanations. I wanted so desperately to believe in our marriage that I was willing to ignore everything my eyes were telling me. Looking back now, I realize how obvious it all was, how the evidence was piling up week after week in plain sight while I deliberately looked the other way because the truth was too terrifying to face. A smarter man would have asked more questions, would have demanded better explanations, would have followed her one Sunday to see where she actually went and what she actually did during those missing 2 hours. But I was not a smart man when it came to my wife. I was a man in love, and love had made me blind to the betrayal that was happening right under my nose every single Sunday morning while I sat at home like a fool waiting with coffee for a woman who was in another man's arms. Last Sunday started like any other Sunday morning, with my wife kissing my forehead and telling me she was heading to the bakery to get fresh bread while I made the coffee and waited for her return like I had done 1,000 times before. I watched her walk out the front door with a smile on her face, watched her disappear down the street toward the bakery, and settled into my usual routine of reading the newspaper and counting the minutes until she came back home. But that particular Sunday was different because I had an errand of my own to run, something I needed to pick up from the hardware store, and for the first time in months, I decided to leave the house while she was out instead of waiting patiently at home. I walked to the hardware store, which was in the opposite direction from the bakery, picked up the supplies I needed for a small repair project I had been putting off, and started walking home through a route that I didn't normally take because it was slightly longer, but the weather was nice, and I felt like enjoying the fresh air. This alternate route happened to take me past the bakery, something I hadn't planned, but that turned out to be the most significant accident of my entire life. And as I approached the familiar storefront, I saw the old baker standing in the doorway looking out at the street. The baker was an older man named Giuseppe who had owned that shop for over 30 years. A kind and honest man who knew everyone in the neighborhood by name and always had a friendly word for anyone who walked through his doors. I had known him for years, bought bread from him hundreds of times, and considered him a trustworthy member of our community who had no reason to lie about anything to anyone. When he saw me walking past his shop that Sunday morning, his face changed in a way that immediately told me something was wrong, and before I could even say hello, he rushed out onto the sidewalk and grabbed my arm with an urgency that stopped me in my tracks. His grip was firm, and his eyes were filled with something that looked like a mixture of pity and reluctance, like a man who had been carrying a burden he didn't want to bear, and had finally decided that he couldn't keep silent any longer. He asked me if I had a moment to talk, said there was something important he needed to tell me, something about my wife that I deserved to know even though telling me would probably cause me tremendous pain. My heart started pounding immediately because his tone and his expression told me this was serious, that whatever he was about to say would change something fundamental about my life. I followed him inside the bakery where there were no other customers at that early hour, and he closed the door behind us and turned to face me with the expression of a man who was about to deliver terrible news and wished desperately that he didn't have to be the one to do it. He apologized in advance for what he was about to tell me, said he had debated with himself for months about whether to say anything, said he knew it wasn't really his business, but that he couldn't in good conscience watch me be deceived any longer by a woman who was clearly taking advantage of my trust. I stood there in that bakery, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread, the same smell that I associated with Sunday mornings and my wife's return, and the simple happiness of our shared routine, and I knew in that moment that everything was about to change forever. The baker's face told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke the words, told me that my worst fears were about to be confirmed, told me that the excuses and explanations I had been swallowing for months were exactly what I had always suspected they were, but refused to acknowledge. I braced myself for what was coming, gripped the counter to steady myself, and waited for Giuseppe to tell me the truth that would destroy my marriage and shatter everything I thought I knew about the woman I loved. Giuseppe took a deep breath before he began speaking, and I could see in his weathered face that this was not easy for him, that he had struggled with this decision for a long time and was only telling me now because his conscience wouldn't allow him to remain silent any longer. He told me that my wife had been coming to his bakery every Sunday morning for as long as he could remember, that she was always friendly and polite, and that for years there was nothing unusual about her visits except that she seemed to be in a hurry to leave after buying her bread. But about 6 months ago, he said, something changed, and he started noticing things that bothered him deeply. He explained that my wife would come into the bakery around 9:15 every Sunday, purchase a loaf of bread in a transaction that took no more than 5 minutes, and then instead of walking home, she would exit through the back door of his shop, which led to a small alley behind the building. He didn't think much of it the first time because sometimes people used that alley as a shortcut to the street behind. But when it happened the second Sunday and the third Sunday and every Sunday after that, he started paying attention to where she was going and what she was doing back there. The old baker's eyes were filled with pity as he continued his confession, and I could feel my heart sinking lower with every word that came out of his mouth. He told me that there was a man who waited for my wife in that alley every Sunday morning. A man who drove a nice car and dressed in expensive clothes and who would embrace her the moment she stepped out of the bakery's back door. He said he had watched them from his window dozens of times over the past 6 months, watched them hug and kiss and hold each other like lovers who couldn't bear to be apart, watched them get into the man's car together and drive away while I was presumably at home waiting with coffee for a wife who was in someone else's arms. I wanted to interrupt him. Wanted to tell him he must be mistaken, wanted to defend my wife against these accusations, even as some part of me already knew they were true. But Giuseppe wasn't finished, and what he said next destroyed any hope I might have had that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. He told me he had taken photographs, not because he wanted to spy on my wife, but because he knew I would need proof if I was ever going to believe what he was telling me, and he felt that as a decent man, he couldn't let me continue being deceived without at least giving me the evidence I would need to see the truth for myself. He reached under his counter and pulled out an envelope filled with printed photographs, images he had captured from his window over the past several months, documenting my wife's betrayal in undeniable detail. I didn't want to look at them, felt physically sick at the thought of seeing my wife with another man, but I knew I had to, because pretending the truth didn't exist was what had gotten me into this situation in the first place. I opened the envelope with trembling hands and looked at the first photograph, and what I saw confirmed everything Giuseppe had told me. There was my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for 15 years, wrapped in the arms of a stranger I had never seen before, her face tilted up toward his with an expression of pure happiness that I hadn't seen directed at me in years. The next photograph showed them kissing, not a friendly kiss, but a passionate embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. And the photograph after that showed her laughing at something he said while he held her hand and looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. I flipped through image after image, each one more devastating than the last, each one proving beyond any doubt that my wife had been living a double life for at least 6 months while I waited at home like an idiot with coffee and trust and love she didn't deserve. My legs gave out beneath me, and I had to grab onto the bakery counter to keep myself from collapsing onto the floor, my entire body trembling as the reality of what I was seeing in those photographs crashed over me like a wave that threatened to drag me under and drown me completely. The world seemed to tilt sideways, and I couldn't focus my eyes properly, couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think about anything except the images of my wife kissing another man that were now burned into my brain forever. Giuseppe rushed to get me a chair and a glass of water, his face full of regret for having to be the one to deliver this devastating news. But I barely registered his kindness because I was too overwhelmed by the magnitude of my wife's betrayal. 6 months of Sunday morning lies stretched out behind me, like a road I had walked blindly without ever noticing the cliff I was heading toward. 6 months of excuses and explanations that I had swallowed like a trusting fool while my wife was in another man's arms, laughing at how easy it was to deceive me. Every kiss on my forehead before she left, every smile when she returned with bread, every moment of our Sunday ritual that I had cherished so deeply was now revealed to be nothing but theater, a performance designed to keep me ignorant while she lived her real life with someone else. The woman I thought I knew, the wife I had trusted completely, was a stranger who had been lying to my face every single week for half a year. I looked at the photographs again, even though each image felt like a knife twisting in my chest, forcing myself to see every detail of her infidelity, because I knew I would never believe it otherwise. There she was smiling at him in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years, her face lit up with a happiness and excitement that had been missing from our marriage for so long that I had forgotten what it looked like. There she was, kissing him goodbye before walking home to me, her lips that had just been on his pressing against my cheek when she returned as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just spent 2 hours in the arms of another man while I waited for her with coffee and love and complete trust. Giuseppe told me more details that I didn't want to hear but needed to know. Explained that the man drove a luxury car and seemed to have money and status, that they always spent about an hour and a half together before she would get out of his car a few blocks away and walk the rest of the way home so I wouldn't see her being dropped off. He said they looked like people who were deeply involved with each other, not like a casual fling but like a real relationship that had developed over time, and he suspected it might have been going on even longer than 6 months based on how comfortable they seemed together. Every word he spoke added another layer of pain to what I was already feeling. I sat in that bakery for almost an hour, unable to move, unable to process what I had learned, unable to imagine going home and facing the woman who had betrayed me so completely while pretending to be a loving wife. The bread she bought every Sunday, the bread that was supposed to represent our simple happy life together, was nothing but a prop in an elaborate deception designed to give her cover while she carried on an affair right under my nose. She had turned our sacred Sunday morning ritual into a weapon against me, used my trust and my love as tools to facilitate her betrayal, and I felt like the biggest fool who had ever lived for not seeing through her lies sooner. When I finally felt strong enough to stand, Giuseppe helped me to my feet and pressed the envelope of photographs into my hands, telling me I would need them as proof if I decided to confront her or pursue legal action. I thanked him for his honesty, for having the courage to tell me the truth that no one else would have told me, and I walked out of that bakery a completely different man than the one who had walked past it an hour earlier. My marriage was over, my trust was destroyed, and the life I thought I had was revealed to be nothing but a comfortable lie. I walked home slowly, taking the longest route possible because I needed time to prepare myself for what I was about to do and to gather the strength to confront the woman who had destroyed our marriage with her lies and her infidelity. Every step felt heavy, like I was walking through water, and my mind kept cycling through the same images from those photographs, my wife's face as she kissed another man, her smile as she looked at him with an affection she hadn't shown me in years. By the time I reached our front door, I had moved past the shock and the sadness and into a cold, hard anger that settled in my chest like a stone. I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table where we had shared so many Sunday breakfasts together, where I had poured her coffee and buttered her bread and listened to her lies about long lines and old friends and wind that messed up her hair. I spread the photographs across the table like playing cards, arranging them so she would see them the moment she walked in, so there would be no opportunity for her to deny what she had done, or concoct another excuse that I might be foolish enough to believe. Then I sat back and waited for her to return from wherever she really was, knowing that this would be the last time I ever waited for her. She came home about 45 minutes later, right on schedule, walking through the front door with a paper bag from the bakery in her hand and the same smile on her face that she always wore when she returned from her Sunday morning adventures. She called out a greeting as she entered, her voice light and casual like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just spent 2 hours with another man, like she wasn't about to walk into the end of her marriage. I heard her footsteps coming toward the kitchen, heard her humming softly to herself, and then I heard those footsteps stop abruptly as she entered the room and saw what was waiting for her on the table. The bag of bread dropped from her hand and hit the floor with a soft thud as she stared at the photographs spread out before her. Dozens of images documenting her betrayal in undeniable detail, proof that her lies had finally caught up with her after 6 months of deception. I watched her face as she processed what she was seeing, watched the color drain from her cheeks, watched her eyes dart from photograph to photograph as she realized that her secret was no longer a secret and that there was nothing she could say that would explain these images away. I expected tears, expected desperate denials, expected her to fall to her knees and beg for forgiveness and swear that it wasn't what it looked like and promise that she would never do it again if I would just give her another chance. But instead, she did something that shocked me almost as much as the photographs themselves, something that revealed just how little respect she had for me and our marriage. She looked at the evidence of her infidelity spread across our kitchen table. Then she looked at me with an expression that was almost bored, and she shrugged her shoulders like I had caught her in a minor inconvenience rather than a devastating betrayal. She told me she was bored with our marriage, said those words without any emotion or remorse, said that I had stopped being exciting years ago and that she needed something more than what I was capable of giving her. She said it like she was explaining why she switched to a different brand of coffee, casually and matter-of-factly, like the destruction of our 15-year marriage was just a logical consequence of my failure to entertain her sufficiently. There was no apology in her voice, no regret, no acknowledgement that what she had done was wrong or that she had hurt me deeply by lying to my face every Sunday for half a year. I sat there in stunned silence as she picked up the bread from the floor and set it on the counter like this was just another Sunday morning, like she hadn't just admitted to cheating on me and dismissed our entire marriage as boring in the same breath. In that moment, I realized that the woman standing in front of me was not the person I thought I married, and that our relationship was beyond saving. I didn't sleep that night, couldn't close my eyes without seeing those photographs and hearing her voice telling me that I was boring, that our marriage was boring, that she had found excitement in another man's arms because I had failed to provide it for her. I lay in the guest bedroom staring at the ceiling for hours, my mind racing through 15 years of memories that were now tainted by the knowledge that the woman I shared them with had been capable of such cold and calculated betrayal. By the time the sun came up, I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to waste another minute of my life on a woman who had wasted so many of hers lying to my face. I called a divorce lawyer first thing Monday morning, found one who had an opening that same day, and drove to his office with the envelope of photographs that Giuseppe had given me, and a determination to end this marriage as quickly and cleanly as possible. The lawyer looked through the evidence with a professional detachment that I envied, confirmed that I had more than enough grounds for divorce, and started explaining my options for how to proceed with the separation of assets and the legal dissolution of our union. I told him I wanted it done fast, wanted her out of my house and out of my life as soon as legally possible, and I didn't care what it cost me financially as long as I never had to look at her lying face again. I went home that afternoon and packed her bags myself, filled suitcases with her clothes and her belongings and her memories, erasing her presence from our home one armful at a time. She wasn't there when I did it, had gone to work like it was a normal Monday, like she hadn't just been caught cheating on her husband and shown zero remorse for destroying our marriage. I stacked her suitcases by the front door, changed all the locks on the house, and sat down to wait for her to come home to a reality she clearly wasn't expecting based on her casual attitude the day before. She arrived around 6 in the evening, tried her key in the lock, and found that it no longer worked in the door that had been hers for over a decade. I opened the door from inside and pointed to her suitcases sitting on the porch, told her that our marriage was over and that she needed to find somewhere else to live starting immediately. The confident woman who had shrugged at photographs of her infidelity suddenly looked shocked and scared, like she hadn't actually believed there would be consequences for her actions, like she thought she could cheat on me and dismiss our marriage as boring and still come home to the comfortable life I had provided for her. She started begging then, the tears and apologies finally arriving now that she realized I was serious about ending things, pleading with me to give her another chance and promising that she would never see the other man again and swearing that she loved me despite everything she had done and said. I listened to her desperate words and felt nothing but contempt for a woman who could only express remorse when her comfortable life was threatened, who had shown no guilt or regret until the moment she realized she was about to lose everything she had taken for granted. Her tears meant nothing to me because they weren't tears of genuine remorse. They were tears of self-pity from a woman who was sorry she got caught rather than sorry she had betrayed her husband. I told her the lawyer would be in touch, told her to take her suitcases and leave, told her that 15 years of marriage had been destroyed by Sunday morning lies and a man in an alley behind a bakery, and that there was nothing she could say or do that would change my mind about divorcing her. She stood on the porch crying and begging while I closed the door in her face, and I felt a strange mixture of pain and relief as I listened to her sobs fade away down the street. The marriage was over, the lies were finished, and I was finally free from a woman who had never deserved my trust or my love in the first place. The divorce was finalized 3 months later, a surprisingly quick process given the evidence I had against her and her inability to contest the grounds I presented to the court. She tried to fight for a larger share of our assets at first, tried to claim that she deserved more after 15 years of marriage, but her lawyer quickly advised her to settle when he saw the photographs and realized that any judge would view her conduct unfavorably in the division of property. She walked away with a modest settlement that was far less than she probably expected, and I kept the house that I had paid for with years of hard work while she had been spending her Sundays with another man. Now I sit alone in that house on Sunday mornings, surrounded by silence where there used to be conversation and emptiness, where there used to be anticipation, and I struggle to remember what it felt like to be happy in this space that is now haunted by memories of betrayal. The kitchen table where we used to eat breakfast together sits empty most days because I can't bring myself to sit there without thinking about the photographs I spread across its surface, without hearing her voice telling me I was boring, without feeling the weight of her lies pressing down on every inch of that wooden surface. I make coffee out of habit, but I drink it standing at the counter, unable to perform the ritual that used to bring me so much joy. The bakery still exists at the end of my street, still sells the same fresh bread it has sold for decades, but I haven't been inside since the day Giuseppe told me the truth about my wife and handed me that envelope of photographs. I can't walk past that building without thinking about the alley behind it, without imagining my wife in another man's arms, without feeling the humiliation of knowing that the baker watched my marriage fall apart from his window while I sat at home like a fool waiting for a woman who was laughing at my trust. The smell of fresh bread that used to make me happy now makes me feel sick to my stomach. I don't know where she is now, don't know if she ended up with the man from the alley, or if their relationship fell apart once the excitement of secrecy was gone. I assume she's out there somewhere living her life, probably telling people a version of events that makes her look like the victim of an unreasonable husband rather than the cheater who destroyed her own marriage through 6 months of calculated deception. She probably found someone new to lie to, someone new to betray, someone new who will sit at home trusting her completely while she slips out the back door of a bakery to meet another man in another alley. That's who she is, and I was just too blind to see it until a kind old baker took pity on me. The loneliness is the hardest part, worse than the anger and the humiliation and the sense of betrayal that still catches me off guard sometimes when I least expect it. I gave her 15 years of my life, built my entire world around our relationship, structured my identity around being her husband, and now I don't know who I am anymore without that role to define me. I come home to an empty house and eat dinner alone and go to bed in a room that feels too big for one person, and I wonder how something that seemed so solid could have been built entirely on lies. I trusted her with my heart, and she treated it like something worthless, used it for her own comfort while she pursued excitement elsewhere, and discarded it without remorse the moment she got caught. I loved her more than I have ever loved anyone, sacrificed and compromised and devoted myself to making her happy. And she repaid that devotion by spending her Sunday mornings in another man's car while I waited at home with coffee and hope and a trust she never deserved. The emptiness she left behind feels permanent, like a hole in my chest that will never be filled again, and I wonder if I will ever be able to look at another woman without waiting for her to betray me too. The house feels hollow now, in a way that I never expected, every room echoing with the absence of her presence, even though that presence was built on lies and deception from the very beginning. I walk through spaces we used to share together, and I see ghosts of memories that I can no longer trust. Moments that seemed happy at the time, but that are now colored by the knowledge that she was probably thinking about him while she smiled at me, planning her next escape while she held my hand. The silence that used to feel peaceful on Sunday mornings now feels oppressive. A constant reminder that I am alone and that the person I thought would be with me forever chose someone else over the life we had built together. I don't know if I will ever love again. Don't know if my heart is capable of opening itself up to another person after being broken so completely by someone I trusted without reservation. The thought of meeting someone new, of starting over, of learning to trust and be vulnerable again, seems impossible right now. Like asking a man who nearly drowned to swim back into the ocean without any fear of the water. Every woman I see makes me wonder what secrets she might be hiding, what lies she might be telling, what betrayals she might be capable of if given the opportunity, and a partner foolish enough to believe everything she says. I have good days and bad days, moments when I feel like I might eventually be okay, and moments when the pain of her betrayal feels as fresh as it did the day I saw those photographs spread across my kitchen table. Some mornings I wake up and forget for a few seconds that she's gone, reach across the bed expecting to feel her warmth beside me, and then the memory comes flooding back, and I have to face the reality of my empty house and my broken heart all over again. The healing process is slower than I expected. 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Progress that feels insignificant against the enormity of what she took from me. But the baker's truth, as painful as it was to hear, ultimately set me free from a woman who never deserved my love or my loyalty in the first place. If Giuseppe had remained silent, if he had decided it wasn't his business and kept what he knew to himself, I might still be sitting at that kitchen table every Sunday morning waiting for a wife who was in another man's arms, still believing the lies, still trusting someone who was laughing at my naivety behind my back. The truth destroyed my marriage, but it also destroyed the prison of deception that my wife had built around me. And even though freedom feels lonely right now, it is better than living in a cage of lies without knowing the bars are there. I am trying to rebuild my life one day at a time, trying to find new routines that don't remind me of her, trying to discover who I am as a person separate from the role of devoted husband that defined me for 15 years. I have started taking walks on Sunday mornings, different routes that don't pass by the bakery, exploring parts of my neighborhood that I never bothered to visit when I was too busy waiting at home for a woman who was never really coming home to me. I have reconnected with old friends I neglected during my marriage, people who are happy to see me even though I come to them broken and changed from the man I used to be. I am alone now. That much is undeniable. Broken in ways I never imagined possible and uncertain about what the future holds for a man whose trust has been shattered so completely. But at least I am no longer a fool, waiting with coffee for a wife who was never really mine. No longer pouring my love into someone who saw me as nothing more than a boring obstacle to the exciting life she wanted with someone else. She betrayed me, destroyed me, left me with nothing but emptiness and doubt. But she didn't defeat me because I am still here, still breathing, still trying to find a reason to believe that life might get better someday. The woman who lied to me every Sunday morning is gone now, and even though her absence hurts more than I ever thought possible, at least the lies are finally over.